So she was getting it on with politicians, which, like, good for her. Welcome, ghoul friends, to another dip in the spooky internet pool. I am your host, Tonya Brown, and today we are talking ghosts. More specifically, the ghost of Sarah Williams. She is a ghost typically called Aunt Sarah. Now, surprisingly, she's never given a last name despite being one of the most popular ghosts of one of the most popular haunted houses in Monticello, Florida. Her brother, on the other hand, is typically mentioned as a footnote. He has a last name and a profession, and she is typically just called Aunt Sarah. And I'm going to be honest, that didn't sit well for me. So I spent about 6 hours reconstructing her family tree, completely rebuilding it and searching old newspapers. So now she has a last name. Her name is Sarah Williams of the John Denham House in Monticello, Florida. Earlier this spring, I had the privilege of staying at the John Denham House, Florida, and apart from some amazing food, I also discovered it is considered one of the most haunted houses in Florida. I had no idea when I booked. They don't typically put that sort of thing on the website. But after doing a little research about the ghosts there, there's one I really wanted to talk about. Aunt Sarah. Now, before I tell you about Sarah, I have to tell you that the stories about her are vague at best and undescript at worst. So, while the stories seem to know a lot about her ongoings and her family, they tend to not mention much about her as a person. So, we're fixing that with Ancestry and newspapers. I have completely rebuilt her life, and I'm so excited to share that with you today. So, the John Denham house was built in 1872 by, you guessed it, John Denham. He made his living by manufacturing supplies, but after the end of the Civil War, his work kind of dried up and he moved back to Monticello, Florida, to build the house that we know today, the John Denham house. And it even has a cupola, which I never know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. But he used to stand there and just like spy on the town, which, like, control freak. And also, I get it. Like, I would too. It's giving me visions of like, remember those TikToks where people would be like vacuuming their tree while listening to gossip? That's what I imagine John doing. So, as he built the house, he was the first owner. Now, the second owner was a Virginia Turnbull. And it typically doesn't show that they had any relation, but that is completely not true. She was actually the sister-in-law of John Denham's niece, Janie. So there was a relation there, which is kind of nice. Like the home kind of stayed within the family. And what is also nice is John Denham's niece, Janie, her and her brother Theodore actually moved into the John Denham house with Virginia. Now, the mansion is currently a bed and breakfast, which I stayed in. I'm currently going through like a bed and breakfast phase. Honestly, it's usually the same price as nearby hotels, but you get breakfast, and I love breakfast. And truthfully, after staying at quite a few, the food is usually better than like in the town. So I highly recommend bed and breakfasts. While I was there, I noticed that the house had a few books laying around on hauntings. So I flipped through them, and sure enough, the house was in the books. And other than John Denham's ghost, which you would expect, you'd see the ghost of the owner, there was one story that I kept returning to, and it is the story of the Blue Room. Sarah was a young school teacher born in 1849, and what she wanted back then was honestly what most people wanted back then, which was to get married and to have children. However, after it was rumored that she was left at the altar, Sarah couldn't quite shake her new reputation as maritally rejected. She lived with her mother and father in their home until a series of unfortunate events. Her mother died in 1888. A year later, her father passed away. And 2 years after that, the family home would be victim of a fire. After all of these incidences, Sarah would move in with her niece and nephew, Virginia and Theodore Turnbull. And the lot then moved into the John Denham house. And that is how we get the famous Aunt Sarah, because she was the aunt of the new owners. While we don't know if marriage truly ever was the ultimate goal for her, I mean, they typically don't put that thing in the family tree, but we do know that having a child was, and we know this based off her ghosts. So being able to be a school teacher, being around children all day, coming home and then caring for her great nieces and nephews, she really seemed to get some satisfaction out of that life. And I'm sure the Turnbulls were very happy to have help raising their children. Now, just because Sarah wasn't married, it doesn't mean her bed was empty. While women in the small town were busy with their weekly Wednesday temperance meetings, Sarah was playing host all her own in her bedroom, the Blue Room, with local politicians. As the town school teacher, she would have direct access to the parents, including the prominent ones. So it's safe to say rumors started of Aunt Sarah in the Blue Room with the politician, with a candlestick in the library, Mr. Green, Scarlet. And these meetings definitely lent towards scandalous rumors, gossip. And I will say, when I was in Monticello eating at the only cafe open, I certainly heard my own fair share of ladies gossiping. So if time holds true, if they were doing it now, they sure as hell were doing it back then when we didn't have cell phones and no entertainment. So, after 10 years of living in the John Denham house and engaging in scandalous rendezvous, Sarah would eventually move to Miami to accept a job offer at Coconut Grove Elementary School. Actually, her sister lived there, which her sister died in like a freak theater accident, according to the local papers. And after that, Sarah decided she wasn't going to live there anymore and she left. So let's think about this, right? Poor Sarah. Her mother dies, father dies, freak accident, rejected at the altar. She moves to Miami to be near her sister to be assistant principal at the new Coconut Grove Elementary School, just for her sister to then die in a freak theater accident. And this was in the paper. I found it. So after this, she reunited with her niece Virginia, and the pair moved to Jacksonville, Florida together to live with Virginia's son and Sarah's grand nephew. She continued a actually very healthy social life, visiting friends all over Florida and Georgia until her death in 1929. And while she did keep that healthy social life, I mean, she got to live in Miami. She was constantly visiting friends. The newspapers were constantly reporting of Sarah Williams of Monticello visiting her great friend here in Georgia or Miami or elsewhere. She had a very healthy social life, but ultimately she did pass away without those children that she had always wanted. After all this research, I never actually found any proof that she wanted children. So we are relying on her ghost story to give us that information. Guests of the bed and breakfasts have claimed that the television in the blue room, Sarah's room, will turn on its own. And a new mother claimed that one night her baby couldn't sleep in the room because the ghost of Sarah was constantly patting the baby's back. And other guests would report that their small children would be tucked into bed by an unseen force. It's no surprise that this room is getting a reputation among those who stay there with children. which tracks, right? Sarah was a principal, she was a school teacher, she lived and raised her nieces and nephews' children. She would care for other children in the house even after her death. Haunted Big Bend does a great job at relaying a lot of these ghost stories. The innkeeper, Pat, says she believes the stories are true because she will hear them over and over and over again at breakfast when the guests sit down to eat. So, why did Sarah choose the John Denham house to haunt? Right? I mean, she lived in Miami, she lived in Jacksonville, she lived in other areas in Monticello. So, why the John Denham house? My theory, it's likely the only home where she found her need for children fulfilled. I mean, and also her thriving social life. So maybe after her death, that was enough for her to call the bed and breakfast home. So what did I learn? One, I learned that like people are really bad at documenting women within history. It still blows my mind that when you read official accounts on Sarah, she's typically referred to as Aunt Sarah instead of by her actual name, despite her brother getting a name and an occupation and all this stuff, but she doesn't seem to be deserving of one. And that's really frustrating. I do a lot of research with ancestry and genealogy, usually for things like this. And yeah, you will find history just does not take as much care in documenting women as they typically do men. And that's why I really wanted to tell this story because Sarah deserves people to know her as a person, not just as a random woman sleeping with politicians in a room at a now bed and breakfast. So would I do it again? Yes, I would absolutely stay at the John Denham house again. If I stayed again, however, I would want to go and do some sort of spirit investigation. I really enjoyed it. The food was incredible. The town of Monticello itself is really small and quaint. I really love, there's another bed and breakfast down the road called the Daffodil House, and the couple there is a really fun and charming and sweet. I actually bought the innkeeper's cookbook that she self-published. It's so cute. So I would go back. I would love to stay in Monticello again, visit the Daffodil House, stay at the John Denham House again, and possibly learn more about Aunt Sarah or Sarah Williams. All right, ghoul friends, keep your candles lit and your planchette at the ready because clearly the spirits are waiting.